Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another how to play video, and in this one we're going to be talking about the girl you all voted for, the excessively endowed elf lady herself, Aria. As with all of my how to play video guides, I'll be going super in depth and covering almost everything you could want to know about the character, including things like stats, skills, and game equipment builds if that's your thing, as well as some general PvP matchup knowledge. If you do enjoy this educational style content, as always, please consider leaving me a like or consider subscribing if you really enjoy it. It does help me out here a ton. So, with the introduction out of the way, let's talk about Aria's stats. Aria is an ice mage of the Taurus zodiac symbol. She shares a stat line with a wealth of other mages in this game, including characters like Zeno, Dizzy, Fairy Tale Tenebria, Sage Balancezon, as well as Solitaria of the Snow. Taking a look at her stats, she has very high defense and speed compared to other 5 stars in Epic 7, and also has good starting effectiveness and effect resistance. Where she falls flat, if you could honestly say anything about this character is flat, is going to be the 1039 attack, as well as the 5299 health, both of which are low compared to other 5 stars in Epic 7. We could kind of give the health a pass though, because this is a mage, and traditionally, mages have pretty terrible health. One last thing to note here, 35% starting critical hit chance is misleading. It is actually 15%, and it is propped up with that extra 20% due to the S2 passive Guide of Darkness. As a bit of trivia before moving on to the very next section, in the English dub of Epic 7, Aria is voiced by Suzy Young, who you may recognize as the voice of Yuffie Kisaragi in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, as well as the object of Denji's desires, Makima, from the recently aired Chainsaw Man. In the Japanese dub of Epic 7, however, Aria is voiced by Sayaka Ohara, who you may recognize as the objectively best character in Fairy Tail, Urza Scarlet, or as Iris Viel von Einsburn in the Fate franchise.
You regret this.
Aria's S1 is Shadow Call. You acquire 1 focus upon use, and it has a 0.7x attack multiplier, as well as an 85% defense multiplier. Similar to characters like Vildred or Spectre Tenebria, this move hits 2 targets. It has a 40 to 50% chance, depending on Molagora, to blind each of those targets for 1 turn. Additionally, if it's not Aria's turn, the chance to blind on this move increases by 20%.
You fool.
The attack multiplier on this move is better than many of Aria's other peers in that regard, but the defense scaling is a bit on the lower end, and I can only assume that's because it is a multi-hit move. The defense scaling, by the way, on this character should be a pretty good indicator that when we go to the character build section after this, that this hero is going to focus on making sure that she is as thick as she appears. Aria's S2 passive is Guide of Darkness. It gives her an extra 20 to 30% critical hit chance depending on Molagora. After Aria activates a skill, if her focus is full, it will consume all focus to activate Dark Shadow Phantom. Dark Shadow Phantom is an AoE attack with a 0.7x attack multiplier, as well as a 140% defense multiplier. This move dispels 2 buffs from all enemies before increasing Aria's combat readiness by 30%.
This will suit you well. You'll regret this.
Dark Shadow Phantom can basically be seen as the real ultimate skill for this character. The multiplier is quite high compared to most, if not all, other defense scaling attacks in Epic 7, by the way. Only really Lionheart Cermia's I Am the Victor is going to outdamage this as far as AoE defense scaling attacks goes. And then you have characters like Karina with her I'll Blow You Away. When you factor in the splash damage on that thing, it's going to be pretty comparable as well. The 30% combat readiness, by the way, is much appreciated on this move as it allows us to go with potentially slower builds in the next section. Aria's S3 is her signature skill, the Umbral Hour. You acquire 3 souls and 3 focus upon use, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It is a non-attack skill that grants Aria a defense buff as well as a counterattack buff for 2 turns. Additionally, it grants a barrier and stealth to all other allies for 2 turns. The barrier strength, by the way, on this is proportional to 100% of Aria's defense.
Do not stand back. You haven't heard of shadow elves?
Aria is naturally a very durable character due to the fact that she is a defense scaling hero. Activating the Umbral Hour not only increases this durability, but it also gives her a buff with a 100% chance to counter, and if you recall, her S1 Shadow Call gets additional perks when it's used not on Aria's turn. When you consider all that, plus the fact that Aria's team is going to be stealth, it's pretty easy to see where this character excels. That's going to be against single target damage dealers. If they can't access your stealth teammates, they're going to be eating a lot of counters and potentially a lot of Dark Shadow Phantoms to the face. Much like with Crimson Armin's skill 3, depending on when you deploy Aria's Umbral Hour, it's going to potentially put the enemy team in a very bad spot. If you activate it before they've set up at the start of the fight, a Dark Shadow Phantom that they're forced to trigger can undo all of their setup. If they funnel into a slower, harder hitting Aria, well, then the game may just very well be over at that point. So much of Aria's success is going to depend on your usage of Umbral Hour. You need to make sure that this character is never in danger of having the counterattack buff removed, that she's never able to get hit with unbuffable, sleep, stun, any of that. Otherwise, you're going to be left with a character that's carrying more dead weight for your team than she already apparently is. Picking her into heavy AoE enemy compositions is also pretty much a recipe for disaster. Aria's Soulburn allows you to take an extra turn after using her S1 Shadow Call for the cost of 20 souls. Not too much to say here about this one. It's an extra turn Soulburn. Those are generally some of the best in the entire game. It's super good on this character, by the way, because it allows you to actually, when you're about to lose your counter buff, Soulburn to get back to the Umbral Hour, make sure it's off cooldown again immediately, and allow you to go right back into that defense buff, that counter buff, and kind of reinforce that gameplay state of funneling everyone into Aria. It's super important to make sure that you're using your Soulburn properly to try to maximize the uptime that you have from the buffs on the Umbral Hour. When it comes to Molagora priorities, no matter how you decide to play Aria, I think you want to be maxing the Umbral Hour first. This is the signature skill in the character, and like we just talked about with the Soulburns, you want to make sure that you have maximum uptime on it, so you might as well get the cooldown as low as possible. After that, I leave it to you to decide which one you want to actually max on the character, but I personally would choose the S1 Shadow Call because it's the move you're going to be primarily counter-attacking with. And as you'll see in the next section, not every build of Aria needs to have 100% critical hit chance, so that's why I think I would max this one second. After that, I'd probably focus on Guide of Darkness last, because no matter how many Molagoras you put into it, it doesn't increase the damage that Dark Shadow Phantom does. It just gives critical hit chance, which, don't get me wrong, is a very desired stat. Before jumping into character builds, I need to talk about the cow lady in the room, as well as revisit the topic of goal setting from videos of mine like How to Play Conquer Aurelius. This character, if you haven't noticed, has massive stat requirements. So massive that my testing of her is the reason that this video took so long to make. So massive that I felt it was necessary to put this disclaimer before the character builds. There is a chance that the stats I'm going to show you in this video might not be accessible to you. The first build that we're going to talk about was barely accessible, it felt like, to me. The goal of my How to Play videos has always been to arm you, the viewer, with knowledge to play a character that you want to play, to make them accessible, to make them enjoyable and fun. But this character oftentimes feels inaccessible, which is why I need to revisit the topic of goal setting. Recall when I talk about goal setting in my other videos that I'm looking for two qualities: realistic goals and measurable goals. Saying I want a 400 speed Aria is not a realistic goal. Saying I want an Aria that does a lot of damage is not a measurable goal. If you were to say to me, hey, Sue, I want a Lifesteal Aria with 1900 defense, 85% crit chance minimum, and at least 250% critical hit damage, that is a realistic goal, and it is also measurable. If we cannot hit the stats that we want, we can at least measure how far off we are from them. And we can look at the per piece average, which I'll show you on the spreadsheet in this section, and see which pieces of our gear need to improve to help get us over the line. Understood? All right, good. The first build that we're going to talk about for Aria is a Lifesteal build. This is the most common build for Aria and the one that I have seen the most amount of people have success with. The reason for Lifesteal is fairly simple. Because Aria is going to be the only character that single target damage dealers are going to be able to target, since her teammates are in stealth, we need to make sure that she can weather the storm. Being a defensive scaling hero, that adds to some durability. However, Aria is a mage. Mage class is notorious for having absolutely terrible health stats. So going something like 4 health set and 2 defense set is not going to be as efficient as just building a bunch of damage on the character and using lifesteal with your counter attacks to heal back up to full health after every single attack. So that's, again, why we're on lifesteal. Looking at the other sets here, I think resist set is going to be the primary offset, although you can go for defense set, health set, or even critical hit chance set. It will help make gearing the character a bit easier for you. I'll break down why each of the stats for the desired stats in a second are where they are at. So for desired stats here with attack, we have 1,681. This is Aria's base attack with a 990 weapon, as well as the recommended artifact, which is going to be Bastion of Hope. And I'll explain why we chose Bastion of Hope more when we get to the actual artifacts. For defense, I have 1,900 defense, although I feel that you could probably go a bit higher, especially if you have Aria imprints. It helps with the survivability. It helps with the damage. For health, I have 13k here. If you cannot hit this, you can go potentially lower, as low as 12k, but you don't want your effective HP to go too low. You don't want your defense and your health to go too low, because then it makes the character super easy to kill. You need to have some level of bulk, so that way you can't just get bursted outright in one hit. You have to have some amount of HP in order to actually lifesteal back up to full. So that's why I went with 13k as the floor. If you can't hit it, again, go for 12k. I've seen as high as 15k on this character. Speed is 160. This is Aria's base speed with just I-90 speed boots. You don't necessarily need to use speed boots, but I feel like this is a good spot for Aria to be. In general, the Umbral Hour, you're going to want to make sure that that is the first move that you use on your team before all the enemy teammates go, and then the rest of your team goes. Or you want Umbral Hour ideally to be the last thing that happens on your team, like with a Crimson Armin S3. You basically want to make sure that your whole team goes, then you pop Umbral Hour, and that way your team is in stealth for the longest amount of time, and then ideally the enemy team all comes back around and funnels into the Aria, and you get a bunch of counters, a bunch of lifesteals, a bunch of Dark Shadow Phantom procs. Critical hit chance here is 100%. That is an ideal world. If you cannot hit the 100% critical hit chance, try to get as close as possible. 85% chance would be fine, but I wouldn't really want to go with that if I could help it. I really think you want 100% chance. If you are struggling to hit this critical hit chance number and the critical hit damage number, which should be 250%, then I highly recommend looking at the second lifesteal build, which is one that I made for newer players who cannot hit this first lifesteal build. I want to show you the ideal Aria first, and then we can talk about potentially an Aria that we can use as a stopgap until we can get to this Aria. Critical hit damage, like I said, 250%. I've seen as high as 280 or even 300%, which is like for people who have tons of imprints and insane gear. For a while, I was rocking 220 critical hit damage when testing this character, and that was fine. The problem is that once you dip the critical hit damage a bit lower, the lifesteal amount that you get back, the health you're actually healing back, is greatly diminished. So you don't really have that true infinite sustain. So if you were definitely going to be pairing Aria every time with a mitigation character and a Soul Weaver, for example, that can keep her healed up, basically topped off, so that way she doesn't have to worry about the lack of returned health from the lifesteal set, then yes, you can go for 220 critical hit damage. You could even go for base critical hit damage if you wanted to. We just need damage so that way she is self-sufficient. If you need a self-sufficient Aria that can work everywhere, regardless of team composition, then you're probably going to go for 250% critical hit damage. Effectiveness is base, and effect resistance I have 100% here, but that is because we are playing her on Bastion of Hope. I've had a lot of success playing her on Bastion of Hope. It is a free-to-play artifact that is accessible to everybody, which is why I recommended it. If you do not plan to play Bastion of Hope, you will need more effect resistance. You'll need about 130% or 140%. Ideally, if you get even 150%, that would be great, but again, stats, there's just so many of them. We need them so high. It's not going to be accessible for everybody. So I went for 100% because the free-to-play best option for the artifact is Bastion of Hope. Taking a look at the right side gear, I'm on a critical hit damage necklace, although You can play health percentage or defense percentage if you decide to forego the critical hit damage like we talked about. Ring is defense percentage not only for the bulk, but the additional damage. But I wouldn't fault you for playing effect resistance as well for a ring, because it does help that stat. That stat is very difficult to get on Aria as well. Regardless of what you choose here, if you go for the effect resistance ring, make sure that it has defense percentage and flat defense on it. If you go for the defense percentage ring, make sure you get flat defense on it. It will lower the amount of defense needed on the per piece average. It's like getting defense on a spot that you normally cannot actually get it. It's very, very important for this character to have, I feel like, flat defense on the ring somewhere. Boots is speed, so we can take our turns in a timely fashion, or somewhat untimely fashion, because you actually, again, might want this character to go last. You could go for health percentage or defense percentage boots if you want in order to make the stats work, but then you're looking at some really bizarre edge cases where you need a lot of speed per piece average on what's supposed to be a slow character. So I decided to just, hard lock it in at speed boots, because it just makes the build path the simplest. Artifact here, Bastion of Hope, I've already talked about it, gives a ton of free effect resistance, absolutely massive amount of health at like 988 as well, and it's free to play. Fairy Tale for a Nightmare is another option if you have a very invested one laying around. I think this is probably the optimal choice for Aria in the long term. If you can play a build like the one I'm describing here with Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, I think you will have the most success with the character. Ancient Book is another free-to-play option. It is kind of a stopgap. It is largely for soul burning and making sure you can kind of control the pace of Umbral Hour. You can potentially soul burn at the start of a match, get one focus, then pop Umbral Hour and go into 4, and that'll give you an incredibly fast Dark Shadow Phantom, which could be potentially good. Book is, again, a decent starting option. I favor it more for the speed build, which we'll be talking about later, but it's still definitely an option. I think it's probably the weakest option here. Last one here, SOS, which is Scroll of Shadows. This is Aria's artifact. If you have very high critical hit chance and critical hit damage on the character, and you could hit everything, this is another great option, very similar to Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. I think Fairy Tale for a Nightmare is a little bit better, but this one is comparable. Looking at the per piece average, I have 18% defense, 12% health, 9% critical hit chance, and 10% effect resistance. Our second build is going to be another Lifesteal build. This one is going to be a bit more beginner friendly, so if you had trouble with the first one, give this one a try. It does require Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, or at least Scroll of Shadows. You're basically leveraging the damage from those artifacts to make up for the fact that you might not be able to get critical hit damage or even critical hit chance. If you do decide to go this route, though, remember, bring this Aria with some kind of mitigation and a healer, because she might not deal enough damage to actually sustain off of Lifesteal on her own for a very long, drawn-out game. Primary stats are going to be Lifesteal and Resist for the same reasons as last time. Same thing with the offsets. Defense, health, critical, whatever makes the math work for you. Desired stats, 1,837 attack. This is a little bit higher than last time, and that's just because Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, which is our recommended artifact, gives more attack than Bastion of Hope. Defense and health here are a little bit higher at 2k and 14k respectively. I figure if you're going to be playing this build, it's because you have a lot of bulk and a lot of ER, but you don't really have the critical hit chance or critical hit damage, so maybe you could afford to bump it up. If not, you could still stay with the same parameters as last time, 12k to 13k health and 1900 defense. Speed is 160. Remember, this is more of a guideline. As long as Aria is taking the last turn in your team, so that way your characters stay in Umbral Hour as long as possible, then that's fine. You can play 160, 170, 150, whatever you want. Critical hit chance, I have 100%, and that is only if you are going to be playing Scroll of Shadows, because you actually still need to land a critical hit and get kind of bonus damage out of it. Like, you might as well lean into the 150% critical hit damage multiplier as much as possible, because again, you're not getting the fixed damage like you would with Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. So if you're going for Scroll of Shadows, probably try to get 100% or even at least like 85%. If you're playing Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, you can just leave it at the base of 45% critical hit chance. Critical hit damage is 150%, because again, this is for people who can't really have it all, so that's why it's at base. Effectiveness is 18%, and effect resistance is 130%, which is kind of the floor, I feel like, if you're not going to play Bastion. That way you have some skin in the game and can actually resist some of these mages that have starting effectiveness that don't actually build a ton of effectiveness. So like a character like maybe like a Politis or even a Zeo that's built straight damage, you have at least some skin in the game against those characters, which is why it's around 130. Taking a look at the right side, on the necklace, I am on health percentage, or you could potentially also play defense percentage, whichever one makes the math work for you. Health percentage, I think more people have health percentage necklaces lying around than defense percentage necklaces, for example. Ring is going to be defense percentage main stat. Although, again, you could play effect resistance. Same thing as last time. Make sure you get some flat defense on that ring. Will make your life a lot easier building this character. Boots are speed. Again, it's a guideline, I think, because you get essentially 45 speed from boots, which is like 90 gear score. That's really hard to make up that level of stats anywhere else, so I might as well just stick with the speed boots. Artifact here is going to be Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, which is obviously giving us a ton of fixed damage. So if you don't have critical hit chance, then this is going to be the one to go with. And like I said before, Scroll of Shadows if you do actually have some critical hit chance. Looking at the per piece average, we have 22% defense, 6% health, 9% critical hit chance if you're going for the scroll, and then 15% ER. The last build that I want to talk about in this video is going to be a speed build, which is popularized by the content creator Elvmage. Primary sets are going to be speed set with resist offset, although you could choose defense or health if you so chose. Taking a look at our desired stats, attack, defense, and health are all exactly the same as the second Lifesteal build for the same exact reasons. The big change here is going to be in the speed. I have 250 speed here, although I personally have played 260 in the past, and I've seen as fast as 270. Now let's talk about Lifesteal build Aria again. When you are choosing Lifesteal Aria, you are choosing her in scenarios where you know that she's going to be the slowest character on your team. That allows your characters to stay in stealth as long as possible and makes it so that the enemies all have to funnel into Aria if possible. That lets you get off a bunch of high damage counters, get a bunch of lifesteals to sustain the game, and then hopefully carry through all of those various different counters and S2 procs. The reason you play the high speed Aria is for a similar effect, but not for a very long or pronounced game. Lifesteal Aria is more favorable for these long, drawn-out standard versus standard or bruiser versus standard matchups. You play speed Aria because you want to potentially protect a very fast draft, or you are confident that you can win a game in a timely manner, and you just need 1 or 2 turns of disruption. So let me explain. If you have a bunch of very fast characters that are, say, over 270 speed, and they all take their turn, and the last of your fast characters to go is Aria, and she sets up with Umbral Hour to protect them, then once the enemy team goes, they all waste their first turn going into the Aria who has the counter buff because there's no one else to really attack, and that allows your fast characters to come back around and potentially win the game for you. Similarly, you can pick this very fast Aria in situations where you know that she is going to be the fastest character in the game, but you've drafted a bunch of slow characters that can potentially end the game very quickly. So you'll have Aria go first, activate Umbral Hour, then the entire enemy team will go, but they basically waste their first turn because they're all going into Aria. And then the rest of your team will bring up the rear and potentially close out the game. So again, this Aria is meant for those strategic decisions. They come up more often, I feel like, than a standard Lifesteal draft of Aria. But I do think that Lifesteal Aria is the more accessible and better one for those of you who are more standard-oriented players. The critical hit chance and critical hit damage are still going to be the base values because I really don't think you can get this level of bulk, speed, and ER and still have some level of damage. Effect resistance is 130%. So that way, again, we don't potentially get stripped by some of these mages, for example, that have starting effectiveness, but don't actually build that stat. Taking a look at the right side gear, necklace is going to be health percentage or defense percentage, your choice. Ring is going to be defense percentage or effect resistance. If you decide to go for defense percentage as your ring, remember, focus on trying to get some flat defense to get that bulk up if you can. Boots are going to be speed, more so than other builds, because we need to make sure that we are going as fast as possible. For the artifact, I think that Fairy Tale for a Nightmare is still the best one on this character, although I would not fault you for taking Ancient Book, because if you're going to be drafting this Aria, it's probably in a very aggressive composition, and having another book holder could let you do something potentially very degenerate. Scroll of Shadows is here as the distant third option because you might possibly be able to get critical hit chance on a fast Aria. I just think you're going to be sacrificing a bit too much. I think Fairy Tale or Ancient Book for like 99.99% of you watching this video is going to end up being one of those two options. Looking at the per piece average, we have 22% defense, 6% health, 13 speed, and 15% ER. As always, let's round out this video with some matchup knowledge. I've already discussed at length throughout this video the importance of making sure the enemy team funnels into the Umbral Hour. Naturally, the best matchups for Aria are going to be single target damage dealers, characters that don't hit hard enough to burst her, or characters that don't have any AoE skills that can access her teammates. Basically, characters that will keep the Umbral Hour engine going. I have on your screen now a couple of characters that generally Aria is pretty good against, but there's definitely more depending on your build, playstyle, teammates, things like that. Aria has a very linear game plan, as you probably noticed. I keep referencing how everyone has to funnel into Aria, and that's going to make her a super poor pick in PvP outside of last pick scenarios or things like Guild Wars where you have perfect information. Playing this character is going to require a lot of testing and practice for you personally to figure out when she is going to be good for you. Let's talk about specifically spots that she's definitely bad in, though. Generally, you want to avoid playing this character into powerful AoE attackers like Landy, or characters with team-wide buff removal like Angel of Light and Angelica. There's also a couple of edge cases that I think are super important and you need to be aware of. Milam's Dragon Eye knocks allies out of stealth, so that's obviously a no-go because then the Umbral Hour engine doesn't work. Solitaria's I Want to Go Home passive stops focus entirely, meaning that Aria really isn't going to have any impact in the game. And Teyu's S2 passive, Azure Waves, hard counters the character entirely as it allows Tornado Sweep to ignore effect resistance, which means, again, Umbral Hour isn't going to do a whole hell of a lot. Rowana is also obviously going to be an issue for this character because she is a counter-based AoE character, and Vigilant Eye will put in a lot of work against you. As far as teammates go, that's going to depend entirely on how you decided to play Aria in the build section. For the slower lifesteal Arias, I think you'll have a lot of success when you pair her with heroes like Maid Chloe or Crimson Armin, who we've mentioned a lot throughout this video. These are the kinds of characters that already favor very slow, setup-oriented game plans. If you decide to go for a faster Aria, I feel like characters like Sid or Kisei are going to be pretty good. These are damage dealers that usually thrive in stealth after their first turn anyways. Aria's Umbral Hour basically gives them a safety net if things go wrong. Regardless of playstyle, anything that is a hard carry that's very difficult to actually attack or get access to, like a Landy on Guiding Light or a Spectre Tenebria, are going to be always welcome. And that's going to do it for how to play Aria. If I missed anything, as always, let me know down in the comments below. This one was, as I've already stated throughout the video, pretty difficult for me to actually make because this character is very difficult to build and you don't get too many reps in with her because she's commonly banned. So again, sorry that it took so long to get here, but I really wanted to make sure I did the character justice and find as much as I possibly can on her before I actually put her out. So again, if I missed anything, let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see more how to play guides in the same style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. As always, have a nice day, enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye now.